Information Technology Governance, Part 1. Have you ever seen that classic movie from the early 1960s called The Sound of Music? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Either way, one of the things I noticed about the movie is the main character, the captain, has this giant home, this mansion with 6 or 7 kids. And in charge of this entire mansion and these kids is what we call a governess. And the governess is that kind of gigantic, I don't know, I think of a governess as some kind of gigantic, maybe Norwegian woman who's just basically like a drill sergeant who's in charge of all the people, all the personnel, taking care of the kids, all the staff in a huge household. Of course, I'm not rich, so I don't have a governess in that kind of household, but it's the same concept. What we're looking at here in this movie and the next couple ones to follow is kind of creating this role of governess for our environment. Think of a governess as kind of a combination of a board of directors, executive management, a steering committee, and the chief information officer, the CIO, or the chief information security officer for our organization. So in this nugget and the two that follow, we're going to break down this role, this very important role of IT, information technology governance. In IT Governance Part 1, we're going to cover 4 key topics. First of all, we'll define corporate and information technology governance. Then, we'll explore practices and procedures for governance, information security governance, and finally, information systems strategy. Okay, now that I've given you this mental picture, kind of this personification of governance, as in the governess, let's kind of look at several different definitions of this concept of information technology governance. One of the main aspects of governance is basically assuring ethical behavior by directors, the board of directors, executive management in preserving and presentation of wealth. Wealth can be in dollar terms, it can be in reaching the goals of a nonprofit organization, impact on society. Bottom line is ethical behavior in reaching your corporate or business goals. That's one of the main things of IT governance and how information technology and security kind of fall into that pattern. It's also a process of distributing rights and responsibilities for these kinds of goals among different decision makers concerning the overall affairs of your company or your business or organization. You want to create a structure and substructures by which all of these objectives can be met. And again, you're going to have a policy in place, governance, to basically plan, monitor, report on all of this. Now realize that depending upon the business sector that you're in, whether it be private or public, whether it be private or business or government, it may involve governmental mandates like HIPAA, SARBOX, different standards, different accepted standards, policies and procedures. So you have to tie into this existing governmental mandates and standards depending on where your government is. Maybe you are IT governance for a law firm. Maybe you're IT governance for a medical facility. Maybe it's an accounting firm, maybe it's a retail, maybe it's a service, maybe it's a government or military. So it's IT governance is really kind of an all-inclusive, comprehensive approach to corporate and business practices. And it focuses on isolating the group and individual expertise to make sure that you can efficiently and effectively get this done, get this governance process accomplished. So IT governance can also focus on just bringing value to your business, meeting your organizational needs, and of course mitigating risk. Now, again, if we look at this logically, if we are monitoring and we're trying to guarantee ethical behavior by executive management, if we're looking at presenting wealth to stakeholders, if we're looking at adhering to governmental mandates and standards and policies, if we're looking at creating a structure where we best utilize our group and individual expertise, then what we really are doing there is mitigating and managing risk. So this really ties quite closely and is tightly coupled into security management as well. Now, since what we're talking about here is really coupling information technology and information security with the overall corporate and organizational policies and practice and reason for existing, I want to give you a real-world example from Cisco that shows how we're evolving into this new converged process between IT, between data, between security, and the actual heartbeat of our organization. You see, it used to be that information technology was really considered only an enabler of our organization strategy, of our business strategy, something that we used. But now it's being regarded as an integral part of our strategy. So CEOs, CFOs, and CIOs are starting to understand that aligning the IT, information technology, enterprise objectives, and security, strategically aligning that with all of the other aspects of our business, all the way up to the top, to the board of directors, is now becoming critical. And IT governance is really concerned with delivering value to the business and making sure that the risks of information technology are mitigated. And so as we see in this diagram from SONA, which by the way, SONA stands for Cisco Service-Oriented Network Architecture. And you can see right there at the very top, we can see that we've got up here this application and collaboration layer, all of the business applications and the collaboration applications. These are the things that drive our business and our organization. Then we've got this kind of layer of services here, and this is all virtualized. And we virtualize this over basically databases and our hardware and software solutions. And so all of these services, security services, mobility services, let's say wireless, handheld devices, storage services, voice over IP, VoIP, collaboration services, let's say like video conferencing, net meetings, things like that, computing services, identity services, all of these things work together to achieve these goals. So what we're starting to see here, and part of the thing about CISA you have to understand is this: as an auditor, you are really putting your hands on the heartbeat. You're opening up the chest and putting your hands on the internal organs of the organization, like a surgeon, like an emergency surgeon in triage. And so you've got this ability to escalate the role of information technology, information security, to where you're almost at the same decision-making, a status-making level, impact level as a member of a steering committee or executive management. Cisco calls this coupling of IT governance and the corporate and organizational strategies. They call this the Intelligent Information Network. Intelligent because it knows about every aspect, and it really, like a octopus, has its tentacles in every access of data, information, security, governance, and operations. If we look at the relationship of IT governance to the rest of our organization and kind of approaching the best practices of IT governance, we have to understand from the beginning that everything begins here. We need to bring value to the stakeholders. Obviously, the stakeholders can either be stockholders or the private owners, the ones that are going to benefit from the operations of this entity. As I've mentioned, it could be dollars, it could be corporate goodwill, it could be delivering public services, nonprofit activities. Regardless, it's the things that drive value to the stakeholder. That has to always be at the center of all of the objectives in governing and controlling and implementing all these processes, which moves us to the area of strategic positioning. And we're going to look later on in this Nugget movie at information security strategy. That's what we're really focused on. Information technology, information security strategy. How is that positioned in the organization? As I mentioned in the past, this positioning was one of really, well, IT and IS is just a resource that we can use. It was almost like its own department over there, its own entity, and upper management rarely got involved in that, but that's really changed. So from a strategic standpoint, this is now positioned, as we saw in the SONA diagram, kind of at the heart as the underlying infrastructure for the business and collaboration operations of our organization. Then, of course, how do we deliver this IT value. Obviously, your business and your organization either has a customer or a recipient of some kind. So how do we deliver those goals with information technology? And of course, we know underlying all of this is managing our risk. And I alluded to that earlier on the very first slide, managing our risk and what IT governance encompasses. And then, of course, along the lines of this entire process, managing and monitoring and reporting on the performance. Are you meeting your goals? This is kind of the relationship structure of IT governance. So here we are in this process, okay, the auditors. We don't want to forget that or lose sight of that. What is our role exactly in this IT governance process? Well, obviously from a real-world standpoint, it depends on the environment. Personally, I've had many different levels of authority depending upon the situation as employee, contractor, or a consultant. But basically, an auditor must possess a high level of expertise in information technology and information security because these components are pervasive and critical to the enterprise. Auditors need to offer leading practical recommendations. Okay, so I'll just put recommend here. They need to give practical recommendations to senior management. They need to be instrumental in planning, implementing, and improving on IT governance initiatives. As auditors, we need to continually monitor compliance. We need to have the ability using software and hardware if necessary, as well as hard copy methods to analyze and evaluate metrics. As auditors in this IT governance process, we need to be able to produce reports and summary documentation. And finally, keep in mind that as auditors, we may actually be a part of the process of hiring additional auditors or going out and finding third-party consultants that are going to fill the gaps in our knowledge. I mean, it's very rare to find one individual that has such breadth and such comprehensive knowledge of information technology, software, hardware, and processes, as well as information security. So we need to be honest and objective about our strengths as auditors to be able to kind of fill in our weaknesses and fill in those knowledge areas that we need to know more about. So as an auditor and this IT governance process, what are some practical practices and procedures? First of all, we want to make sure that the IT governance plan and policy is aligned, closely aligned with the goals of the enterprise, the IT enterprise, the IS enterprise. Go back and look at that SONA diagram, the IIN infrastructure that I showed you earlier, and all of those different components, how do those align with the goals of your organization? As an auditor, we need to be intimately knowledgeable in that area. We also want to take advantage of opportunities. Opportunities in new technology, opportunities in new resources, opportunities in new software, opportunities of brain trust to do whatever we can to achieve the benefits that come with a well-governed organization. We want to make sure that we are managing our IT resources properly and that we're controlling risks properly. Again, we'll be looking at these specific issues later on in this Nugget series. We have to have a fundamental understanding of our role as auditors in this IT governance process. That's what this Nugget movie and the two to follow this one are going to prepare you to do. Our reporting to management, to senior management, to CIOs, to CFOs, to whoever, CSO, security officers, should be timely and thorough. We may have interim summary reports, but the ultimate final reports should be complete and thorough. We want to create an IT strategy committee. You want to pull together all of the best resources of your organization and put together a strategy for information technology and information security to address the agreed upon goals and objectives of IT governance. And then we're going to divide the responsibilities between strategy committees and steering committees. We'll talk more about steering committees here in a bit. Putting together an information security committee, a strategy committee, is key to implementing IT governance. For instance, an IS steering committee may have members like a sponsoring executive, somebody from upper management who's sponsoring this particular initiative, key business executives, key users, for example, power users in certain departments, the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, possibly the organization has a Chief Security Officer, a CSO, then key advisors. And that's where we come in. You may have IT advisors that are separate from our group. You may have legal advisors. You may have financial accounting advisors. Then you have the audit advisors, and that's really who we are. So what goes into this IS governance process? Let's take a look. Your information security steering committee is going to be driven by several factors, and it really comes down to what we call the CIA of security. I'm actually going to add another A to this and make it CIAA. We're dealing with the confidentiality of data and systems, which typically means not only physical security to protect from thievery or corporate espionage, but the encryption of data within our organization and data leaving and entering our organization. Confidentiality, the integrity of data, make sure it's not changed. Make sure that, for example, hackers don't hack our corporate website or our public website with something that's totally erroneous. Integrity of services. And then we have what's called two A's here. We have availability and authentication. Availability is continuity of services. This is putting together a business impact analysis of disasters that can happen on your organization. How do you keep services, data flow, hardware, all the business processes, how do you keep all these things going in case of an emergency or a natural disaster? So continuity of services, protecting our corporate information assets, authenticating users against one another, authenticating users against systems, hardware, for example, or servers, and authenticating devices to each other as well. All of this is what drives this Information Security Governance Steering Committee. And then we want to be focused on the complexity, the importance, and the criticality of security information, the data that we're securing, and also the mechanisms, the security policies, the applications that we're using to actually do the securing. And we also want governance to be involved by individuals at the highest levels. Typically, you'll have a sponsoring executive, somebody from upper management, dealing with you on this particular campaign, this particular project, this particular initiative. Information security governance broadens the scope beyond just simply protecting IT systems, like, for example, locking down servers and network devices and end hosts like laptops and PCs, but overall integration and overall security from the physical to the logical to data to intellectual property. It's all-encompassing, regardless of the way it's handled, regardless of the way it's processed, regardless of the way it's transported or stored. We have to broaden the scope, as we saw in that SONA diagram, across the entire converged infrastructure. And then, IS security governance is really the responsibility, ultimately, at the top of the board of directors. As an auditor, it will never be our ultimate responsibility, and it shouldn't be. So there's going to be somebody at either at the board of director level or an executive manager sponsoring executive that's going to be ultimately the one that has to answer to this process. We may have somebody above us that's maybe a CIO or a CSO, or maybe there may be another layer between the CIO and the CSO and that person. Hopefully, we'll just put a manager. Hopefully, there aren't too many chiefs, okay, in between ourselves. I'll just put, here we are, between us, the auditor, and ultimately the board of directors. Too many levels between ourselves and the board of directors is not a proper approach to IT and IS governance. The auditor should have access, as far as reporting especially, summaries, reporting, input, feedback, somebody that's a management sponsor like a CIO or a CSO or other executive. So, further responsibilities of information security governance include evaluation and preparation for exposure to civil liability, legal liability, government regulation, those types of things. Making sure that we're accountable for critical information during transition periods, such as a merger and acquisition, recovery processes, regulatory response processes. Also, making sure that we're adhering to policies, policy compliance. That's part of our job as IS governance. To enhance the business operations continuity. You know, we have to deal with security attacks from the inside and the outside. We have to deal with theft, with criminals, escalation of crime. We have terrorism, vandalism to deal with. So these are things that are also have to be part of our equation. Remember, we're trying to keep business going and keep business profitable and productive. Our IS governance policy is the foundation for the overall risk management. It's the foundation for process enhancement. It's the foundation for fast incident response procedures. And it's the IT strategy and IT steering committees that make these things possible. We're going to optimize allocation of our limited security resources. I don't care how much money your organization has, your security resources are always going to be limited. Remember, a lot of management do not see IT and security as things that actually add to the bottom line. Now that's going to change, but you may have to overcome some of the long-held old school beliefs that this kind of technology is not just gadgetry. It's not just simply hardware and programs. Okay, these are finite, limited resources. We need to make sure that they're used with maximized benefit. We also want to be involved, if we can, in the procurement process as well. We may come along too late, but to implement additional security policies and governance for IT and IS, we may simply have to add we may simply need to add new hardware and applications. We might be part of the procurement process if we have knowledge, expertise in those areas. And then making sure that important decisions are made on accurate data. As an auditor, if we aren't dealing with accurate data, objective data, data that's not subject to conflict of interest, then we're going to have problems down the line. That's going to be an issue. So do we have accurate data? And we can rely on access systems, we can rely on security policy, we can rely on personnel to make sure that we have accuracy in data, in reporting. But again, if you've got problems at the top, at the board of directors and executive management, that's going to flow downward. Okay, so you may find that it's an upward impossible battle. Hopefully that won't be the case for you. We've got to have accurate information, accurate data that complies to governance. Okay, there should be 5 main results of security governance, and you need to know what these are. First of all, one result should be a strategic link, a strategic bond tightly coupled to the business objectives or the organizational objectives. You want to align the information security with the business strategy by developing security requirements that fit into your enterprise processes, take into consideration your culture, your government, your technology, the structure of your organization, all combined with a well-defined threat, vulnerability, and risk profile. Second is comprehensive risk management. You want to manage and execute the proper measures to mitigate risks and to, if not eliminate, try to reduce the potential impact on information resources to a level that's acceptable by the committees. You'll have to profile the organization. You need to understand the risk exposure and the potential consequences. You need to look at your risk management priorities and keep in mind the effects of residual risk. We've also got optimizing investments. That's one of the results, one of the outcomes of security governance. This is really value delivery, optimizing security investments that support your business requirements and business objectives. To do this, you'll need a written security policy and a complete end-to-end business solution. Resource management, this is using information security knowledge and infrastructure as efficiently and effectively as possible. Make sure that knowledge is compiled, captured, and readily available. Document all the security processes and practices, and develop a security architecture that defines and efficiently utilizes your infrastructure resources. And then, of course, finally, documentation, so very important, reporting on the performance, reporting on the results, okay? Measuring, monitoring, and reporting on information security processes to make sure that objectives are met. Here's another model for you to absorb. This is a kind of 5-level governance framework. At the top, a comprehensive strategy bound to organizational objectives. That makes sense from all we've talked about so far in this movie. The second level, security policies. Again, the security policy is a subset of the governance policy, IT governance, and the overall written security policy of your organization. It needs to meet the strategies, needs to meet the controls, either logical or physical access controls, and any regulatory needs. For example, Sarbox, HIPAA, and many others. The third tier, complete set of standards. A complete written set of standards, policies and procedures for each one of these that you implement. Fourth tier, a security structure that is devoid, as much as possible, of any conflict of interest. And as an auditor, you need to be as objective as possible, and you need to be monitoring as part of this governance process to be aware of any detrimental conflict of interest at any point along the way. And then finally, as we looked at before, part of this framework is effective monitoring and effective reporting. Now, I've already alluded to these four key players in ITIS governance all through this CBT Nugget movie, but we want to kind of evaluate them again. At the top, board of directors / senior management, and realize that all four of these types of players are going to be involved in management. They're going to be involved in strategic alignment. Again, aligning IT and IS with business objectives or organizational objectives. They're going to be involved in risk management to some degree. They're going to be involved in delivering value to the bottom line. They'll be involved in measuring performance. They'll be involved in managing and allocating resources. And then finally, assuring that all of the processes adhere with the overall IT governance initiative. The board of directors are going to require this alignment. The senior management board of directors are going to institute the policies at the top level. They're going to require reporting. They're going to require security. They're going to need security effectiveness, knowledge of management and resource utilization, and assurance that policy processes have been integrated. Now, your executive managers, again, this is, as I said, most likely one of these people will be your contact person as a auditor. It may be a CIO, it may be a CSO, but basically the chief executive management, they're going to be basically getting their directives from the board of directors and senior management, and it'll be their responsibility to implement this directly to personnel. The steering committee is at the bottom. Before we look at that, let's talk about the CIO and the CSO. These are the individuals who are really hired to develop the security strategies, to oversee the programs and initiatives, to be the liaisons with businesses, with process owners, with department heads, possibly with legal, with accounting, and with auditors. Okay, they're going to make sure that risk and business impact assessments are done. They're going to develop risk mitigation strategies. They're going to enforce policy. Again, that's where really the enforcement is, at that level. They're going to monitor the effectiveness. They're going to develop metrics, different approaches, both quantitative and qualitative, to analyze and draw conclusions from this overall governance process. They'll continually develop methods to more efficiently capture knowledge, to disseminate information, and to develop more accurate metrics to make things more efficient and more effective. And again, this is the responsibility of the CIO, the CSO, and their team. And their team generally comes down to this steering committee, whose job will be to review the strategies, look at the integration efforts, and provide input. Ensure business owners that there's integration and support. They'll identify risks, present risks, emerging risks. They'll review the adequacy of existing security initiatives, existing policy, all those sub-policies and those sub-modules as they're applied to different layers and different levels of the organization. They're going to review and advise, and they're going to identify critical business processes and assurance providers, and they're going to direct assurance integration efforts. These are the key players in IS governance. Finally, let's talk a little bit of strategy. Information security strategy. Strategy really addresses the long-term security direction of the company or the organization. Now, when I say long-term, I mean 3 to 5 years, okay? And what we're doing is we're creating a strategy and we're leveraging all of our presently available resources, and we're also looking at our future planned resources and objectives from a 3 to 5 year period. Now, this IS strategy is in the realm, ultimately, of top-level management, executive management. And then, of course, this is going to flow down, typically through a CIO or a CSO or some other appointed executive to the steering committee. The steering committee may not be called a steering committee, but it has some type of committee, some team concept of information security, whose goal is to identify cost-efficient IT solutions and security solutions to solve problems, to anticipate problems and challenges, to align departments, or if you have a modular design, to align modules with the strategic long-term goals of the company, to provide input, to ultimately go to stakeholders or stockholders, to plan and implement IT and IS spending budgets. So we're in the kind of the auspices of the steering committee, which you as an auditor will be a member of most likely. If you're not, either way, you're going to have to study and get your hands on as much information, either web-based information or written information through interviewing. We talked about this earlier in this Nugget movie. Data gathering, interviewing, reporting, workshopping, whatever it takes to get the information that management supplies that can help you in your role in helping implement this strategy. As a member of the steering committee, you'll help oversee possibly certain aspects of this process. Very rarely will an auditor be involved in actually physically implementing either a logical or physical mechanism or some type of software or hardware solution. So the steering committee is going to have several tasks. It's going to have to publish its duties and responsibilities in some type of formal document that's often referred to as a charter. Let me just jot that down here. Referred to as a charter. It may be called a policy. But each member should understand his or her role in this charter, in this committee. They have authority in their own particular domain, their own department, their own domain, their own level of the organization. And then a general board of review is part of this steering committee, this IS strategy, which is there for all IS projects, not really involved in the routine mundane tasks, just really there, again, the whole concept of steering the ship, okay? The team that steers the ship. Not necessarily the ones swabbing the deck and hoisting the mainsails and all that stuff. They're the steering committee. Now, there are some primary functions that go along with all this IS strategy for our committee. Again, reviewing long-term plans, reviewing the short-range plans of the security department, make sure that they align with the corporate objectives, review any acquisitions of hardware and software, make sure that these budgets are approved by whoever's the approval, whoever signs off on these things in management. Approve major projects, monitor major projects, look at the status of these plans and budgets, priorities, standards and procedures, the overall performance. Approve and monitor this. You may also have to look into, let me just jot this down. I jotted down insourcing and outsourcing, going in-house to find particular people to add to the team, people to solve problems for you, people to assume new roles and responsibilities, or outsourcing, again, maybe out of the country, offshore, to some other place to get the job done. Going to India for some programmers, for example. Making sure you have adequate resources and allocation of resources in terms of time, in terms of equipment, and in terms of personnel. You may also have to be part of decision making regarding the centralization and assignment of responsibility or the decentralization of assignment of responsibilities. Developmental processes, implementation processes, enterprise-wide, again, all under a scope of the 3 to 5 year strategy, ultimately reporting to the board of directors. In Information Technology Governance Part 1, we covered 4 key topics. First of all, corporate and IT governance was defined in great detail, looked at practices and procedures from a practical standpoint. We broke down information security governance, and then finally, IS strategy. I hope this CBT Nugget's been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing. Hey, we'll see you in Part 2.
So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, adieu. Adieu, adieu, to you and you and you.